Identity proofing is the process of establishing that a person really is who they claim to be, and it sits at the very beginning of any trustworthy identity system. Before credentials exist, before authentication happens, and before access decisions are made, there has to be confidence that the identity being enrolled corresponds to a real individual. If that initial step is weak, everything built on top of it inherits that weakness, no matter how strong the later controls appear. Identity proofing is therefore not just an administrative step, but a security control that determines whether accounts represent legitimate people or convenient fictions. In practice, proofing defines the trust boundary between the real world and the digital identity you will later rely on for authorization, auditing, and accountability. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the CISS books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series.
Once identity proofing establishes confidence in the person, registration links that verified identity to an account and to the credentials that will later be used for authentication. Registration is where abstract identity becomes operational, because this is the point where systems create records, assign identifiers, and prepare the mechanisms that allow the individual to interact with services. This step must preserve the integrity of the proofing outcome, ensuring that the account created truly corresponds to the verified individual and not to a substituted or intercepted process. Registration decisions also shape how identity will be represented across systems, including which attributes are captured and how they are stored. When registration is poorly designed, it can introduce gaps where identities are duplicated, mislinked, or difficult to manage over time. The strength of identity proofing depends on the quality of evidence presented, the rigor of verification steps, and the resistance of the process to fraud and manipulation. Evidence alone is not enough because documents can be forged or stolen, and digital artifacts can be replayed or fabricated. Verification ensures that evidence is checked against reliable sources and that it meaningfully supports the claimed identity. Fraud resistance measures address the reality that attackers actively try to defeat proofing systems through social engineering, document forgery, or automated abuse. The combination of these elements determines whether proofing merely looks thorough or actually resists adversarial pressure. Strong proofing is therefore a layered process rather than a single check, and its design must assume motivated attackers rather than honest mistakes alone. Evidence types commonly used in proofing include government-issued identification, supporting documents, and checks against authoritative records. Government identification can provide a high-confidence anchor because it is typically issued through controlled processes and includes multiple identifying features. Supporting documents, such as utility bills or employment records, can add context and corroboration, but are usually weaker on their own. Authoritative record checks involve querying trusted databases to confirm attributes such as name, date of birth, or status, providing independent confirmation beyond what the applicant submits. Each evidence type has different strengths, availability, and privacy implications, which must be weighed carefully. Effective proofing selects evidence types that are appropriate to the risk level and combines them in ways that reduce reliance on any single artifact. Validation is the step that confirms documents are genuine and that they plausibly belong to the applicant presenting them. This can include checking physical security features, verifying digital signatures, or using automated tools to detect forgery and alteration. Validation also considers whether the document is current, unexpired, and consistent with the claimed identity attributes. Importantly, validation is not just about the document itself, but about the context in which it is presented, such as whether the presentation method aligns with expected use.
A genuine document presented by the wrong person is still a failure of proofing, which is why validation must be paired with verification. Without careful validation, proofing systems risk becoming document collection exercises rather than identity assurance mechanisms. Verification goes a step further by confirming identity attributes through trusted external sources and cross-checks. This may involve confirming that a name and date of birth match authoritative records, that an address is associated with the individual, or that other attributes align consistently across sources. Verification helps detect stolen or borrowed documents because mismatches often appear when attributes are checked independently. It also reduces reliance on self-asserted information, which attackers can manipulate easily. In strong proofing processes, verification is designed to be difficult to game at scale, using multiple checks that would require significant effort or insider access to defeat. The objective is not absolute certainty, but a level of confidence that is commensurate with the risk of granting the resulting identity access. Enrollment is the point where the system captures identifiers that will later be used to recognize and interact with the individual. These identifiers can include email addresses, phone numbers, usernames, or biometric templates, depending on the system's design. Enrollment choices have long-term implications because they influence how users authenticate, recover access, and interact with identity services. For example, capturing a phone number enables certain authentication and recovery flows, but also introduces dependency on telecommunications infrastructure and number ownership stability. Biometric enrollment introduces additional sensitivity because biometric data is inherently personal and difficult to replace if compromised. Enrollment must therefore be deliberate, capturing what is necessary for function and assurance while minimizing unnecessary data collection. Credential issuance follows enrollment and creates the authenticators that the individual will use to prove their identity in the future.
This can include issuing cryptographic certificates, generating tokens, enabling device-based authenticators, or establishing initial secrets under controlled conditions.
The issuance process must ensure that credentials are delivered securely to the intended individual and not intercepted or duplicated. This step is often where attackers attempt to redirect credentials or enroll their own authenticators, which makes secure delivery and confirmation essential. Credential issuance also establishes the initial trust relationship between the identity system and the user, setting expectations for how access will be controlled and recovered. A weak issuance process can undermine even the strongest proofing by allowing credentials to be misbound or misdelivered. Binding is the technical and procedural process that securely connects the issued credential to the verified identity and the corresponding account. Binding ensures that when a credential is presented later, the system can confidently associate it with the correct individual and account record. This may involve cryptographic association, secure storage of identifiers, and confirmation steps that prevent substitution attacks. Binding is especially important in multi-factor designs, where multiple credentials or factors must all map back to the same identity without ambiguity. If binding is loose or poorly implemented, attackers may be able to attach their own credentials to a legitimate account or hijack an existing binding relationship. Strong binding makes credentials meaningful rather than interchangeable artifacts. Reproofing becomes necessary when there are major changes or when there is reason to suspect that an account has been compromised or misused. Events such as significant profile changes, loss of high-assurance credentials, or indicators of account takeover can trigger the need to re-establish identity confidence. Reproofing does not always require repeating the entire original process, but it must restore assurance to an appropriate level before sensitive access is resumed. This step acknowledges that identity assurance is not permanent, because circumstances change and attackers adapt. Designing clear reproofing triggers and processes helps organizations respond decisively without either overreacting or allowing compromised identities to persist. Reproofing is therefore part of maintaining trust over time, not an admission that the original proofing failed. Identity lifecycle events introduce additional complexity because identities evolve as people change roles, names, or affiliations. Employment changes can alter what access is appropriate, while role shifts may require updating attributes that drive authorization decisions. Name changes and other personal changes must be handled carefully to preserve continuity without creating duplicate or orphaned identities. Each lifecycle event is an opportunity for error or abuse if processes are unclear or poorly controlled. Effective identity systems treat lifecycle management as an extension of proofing and registration, ensuring that changes are authorized, documented, and auditable. This continuity is essential for maintaining trust in identity data over long periods. Registration processes formalize how identities are approved, which attributes are required, and how actions are recorded for auditability.
Clear processes define who can approve registrations, what evidence is acceptable, and how exceptions are handled, reducing the chance of ad hoc decisions that weaken security. Auditability ensures that proofing and registration actions can be reviewed after the fact, supporting investigations and compliance requirements. These processes also establish accountability by linking decisions to responsible parties rather than to anonymous system actions. When registration is well governed, it becomes predictable and defensible rather than opaque and inconsistent. That predictability is a security asset because it reduces opportunities for manipulation and error. Strong identity proofing reduces downstream fraud and credential abuse because it raises the cost of creating and maintaining fraudulent accounts. When attackers cannot easily obtain high-assurance identities, they are forced to rely on lower-value targets or noisier techniques that are easier to detect. Strong proofing also improves the effectiveness of later controls, such as authentication and authorization, because those controls depend on the assumption that identities represent real, accountable individuals. While proofing does not eliminate all risk, it shifts the balance by making identity compromise more difficult and less scalable. This upstream investment pays dividends across the entire access control stack by reducing the volume and impact of identity-based attacks. Identity proofing and registration form the trust foundation for access control because they define which identities exist and how much confidence the system has in them. Proofing establishes the initial link between a real person and a digital identity, while registration operationalizes that identity through accounts, attributes, and credentials. Evidence, validation, and verification determine proofing's strength, while enrollment, issuance, and binding ensure that credentials are correctly attached to the right individual. Lifecycle management and reproofing maintain that trust as circumstances change, and governance ensures decisions are consistent and auditable. When these elements work together, authentication and authorization controls have a solid foundation to build on rather than a fragile assumption. Without strong proofing and registration, even the most advanced access controls rest on uncertain ground. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.